Hey Wargamers, we are finally beyond the veil of 10th edition, meaning we have the full set of points, we have the full set of rules for Tau in 10th edition, and so that means it is time for some more Mathhammer. Yes, that's right. If you haven't seen one of these videos from me before, basically what I do is go through and calculate the offensive shooting point efficiency of every unit in the codex, or in this case index, and basically figure out how much damage they do per point you pay for them. Now, in this edition, that's a little bit simpler given how war gear is free, so the resolution is much more coarse in terms of the cost of different units. But there are some tricky new math equations involved dealing with weapon types. Now, in previous editions, we've really just had weapon types be one thing or another. They've been heavy or they've been assault. But now you can mix and match various keywords, not just those basic weapon types. And so the spreadsheet actually gets fairly complicated. Not so much in the case of Tau specifically, but across the game as a whole, you have to account for a lot of different options. And so we have done that here today, and we will go through all of the different point efficiencies of the different units in the index to figure out which is the most point efficient offensively. Now, it's important to remember that this is not Warhammer. This is not the only thing that's important. It's a useful tool for considering trade-offs between different units. Yet, for example, you can look at two different units and see which one is going to give you more bang for your buck in this particular context, but it doesn't account for all the different layers of complexity in the game, right? It doesn't account for utility, it doesn't account for their rules interactions, it doesn't account for their durability or defense, right? So there's all these other elements of it that are just totally not accounted for in Mathhammer, and we could run separate analyses for some of that, right? Like we could ask, how much movement do you get per point, or things like that. But generally, the offensive point efficiency is a little bit more interesting than those things. So that's what we're sticking to today. But really, it's not the most important thing, right? Missions are not just about shooting. They're not just about who does the most damage for how much you pay for them. They're about doing the things, right? Warhammer is a game first and foremost about remembering things, but then also about making sure your little toy soldiers do the things they're supposed to do. And so Mathhammer is just one tiny slice of that larger puzzle. And importantly, it assumes an equal opportunity across different units, right? So we look at the offensive point efficiency of different units. We are assuming, in comparing those, that they each have equal opportunity to deliver that damage. So it ignores differences in range, differences in positioning, differences in durability. So if you have a weapon that's really points efficient but only shoots 6 inches, you're probably actually not going to get that efficiency out of it because you're only going to get to use it once in the whole game. Or if you have something that dies right away, doesn't have the durability, you're still not getting that same value out of it because you're not actually being able to use it for the extended period of time that maybe a more durable unit is going to be able to affect the game. So those are some important things to remember when we dive into this. Okay, so how did I go about this? Well, first and foremost, I selected a bunch of different target profiles, right? So these are just things that I picked spanning a range of toughness, durability, saves, that sort of thing, right? And they are not necessarily the things that you're going to see most in the meta. The meta is brand new. We do not know what it will be. And so do not necessarily think that this is a representative sample of all the things that you will see on a given day at a tournament or anything like that. It is just a starting point for us to look at the variability and efficacy across the range of unit types. So some of these are going to be more relevant to you than others. And if you have profiles that you think are particularly interesting or particularly relevant to the whole community, throw those in the comments. We can do another one of these looking at additional profiles and figure out what has the most bang for your buck there too. That sounds fun. Let's do that. And so the Mathhammer here includes buffs from leaders like Cadre Fireblade. So, for example, I have a entry for Breachers on their own, and I also have an entry for Breachers with a Cadre Fireblade. That changes both their offensive output, but also their cost. So that's accounted for here. I have overcharging on Ion on most units. There are some units that I haven't accounted for that just because I think you're probably not going to overcharge that much. And so really it's not that relevant relevant of a metric because, you know, you're only going to be doing it maybe one turn a game. Other ones, maybe you will do it more. Melta profiles on fusion that have at least 18-inch range. So if we're dealing with the nerfed 12-inch range fusion, I'm assuming that that's just not a relevant metric because you're not going to be within 6 inches using your Melta profile that often. I do include double shots for rapid fire weapons. That's really just pulse rifles. And then devastating wounds from rail guns are also included. Rail guns, rail rifles, you know, you name it. Anything with the rail name has devastating wounds accounted for in some of these calculations. So those things are all included. Things that aren't included, I don't include buffs from like Cao Yun, right? Sustained hits, not something that I'm incorporating here. For the greater good is not included, so I do not have units being guided. You know, you can assume for, you know, most of the units here, if they are guided, they're going to have a proportional increase in their efficacy, and so that's really only relevant for comparing things like Kroot versus strike teams, for example, where Kroot don't have for the greater good, because they're, you know, the Kroot aren't going to have access to that potential buff. So I didn't include that here just because that opens up a whole can of worms about assumptions of who has it, who doesn't, that sort of thing. I also don't include target traits. So like if your target has the fly keyword and for example the sky ray, like you know, is able to have, you know, hit better against things with fly, right? So I don't incorporate that kind of interaction. We're just looking at the profiles here, not the keywords of the targets, anything like that. Not looking at abilities. So if they have like -1 damage or something, that's not incorporated here either. We are just looking at the target defensive profiles, not their keywords. All right, so how we're going to go through this. Basically, I will provide 2 different targets for you. So in this case, we're looking at toughness 3 targets that vary in their other defensive profiles. So for example, 5-up save versus a 4-up save. And we will work our way through first units that don't have an invulnerable save, and then units that do have an invulnerable save in the second half of the video. Now, for each of these, I provide an example of a unit that has this profile from the new index rules. But again, we're looking mostly at the defensive profile here. The fact that this is a guardsman and any rules that guardsmen have is irrelevant. We're just looking at toughness 3, 5-up save, 1 wound, and calculating how much damage we can do against that. And then I provide the top 6 most point efficient options against those targets. Now, this can represent a pretty broad range of point efficiency. So against guardsmen, for example, breachers, insanely point efficient. You get a lot of bang for your buck there. Piranhas, much less point efficient, but they still stack up to be, you know, the 6 most point efficient across these different options. Importantly, when I list something that has options or has different combinations, but I don't specify it, that means that all those different options broadly fall into the same category or the same ranking. So in this case, breachers are the most point efficient option against guardsmen, and that's true with a Cadre Fireblade especially, but also without a Cadre Fireblade, they still perform very well. Crisis suits with or without commanders themselves, all of those units stack up in the second place here. And we'll do a whole video looking at different crisis and commander loadouts. So, you know, that's a discussion for another day, I think. But for now, we're just looking at the particular units. Pathfinder teams with ion rifles. Now, again, this is at the whole unit scale. So it's not just the Pathfinders with ion rifles themselves. It's the whole unit. They come in third. Strike teams, again, with Cadre Fireblade is going to be more efficient, but without will also perform well here. Vespid and then Piranhas with burst cannons round out the top 6 against guardsmen. Against Eldar Guardians, we have basically the same rankings: breachers, crisis suits, and commanders. Strike teams, Pathfinders with ion, Vespid, and Pathfinders with rail round out the top 6. Looking at a Primaris profile, so toughness 4, 3-up save, 2 wounds, we see breachers, again with the Cadre Fireblade, is going to be the most point efficient, but without is also good here. Vespid, crisis suits, different varieties of commanders, all those come in third position. Strike teams, again with Cadre Fireblade, is going to be more point efficient than without. Pathfinders with rail rifles, and the Razor Shark brings some heat rounding up the top 6 against Primaris. Sanguinary Guard, so T4, 2-up save, 2 wound profile. We have Vespid at our number 1 spot. Breachers coming in after that. Crisis suits and or commanders, Pathfinders with rail, broadsides with heavy rail rifles showing up for the first time here, and then Razor Sharks rounding out the top 6. Against Orc Boys, so toughness 5, 5 up save with 1 wound. Breachers still holding strong as one of the best units. Strike teams show up here though too. Again, that's assuming that they are within rapid fire range. Crisis suits, crisis commanders, you name it, on the 3rd position. Again, very consistently showing up as a relevant but not always the most point efficient option here. Pathfinders of any type showing up against Orc Boys, so whether you have Rail or Ion, Pathfinders are going to be a really good choice against Orcs. Piranhas with the burst cannon here, and then Vespid in the top 6 spot. Against Tyrannid Warriors, so toughness 5, 4 up save, 3 wounds. Again, Breachers, Vespid, Crisis, and or Commanders. Pathfinders with Rail here are going to be better because, of course, with the multiple wounds. Strike teams here as well, and then Broadsides with the Heavy Rail Rifle. And again, I should mention that the Broadsides with the Heavy Rail Rifle showing up does make a lot of sense. Specifically, I'm talking about the Plasma Rifle variant here. So we have Heavy Rail Rifle with Plasma Rifle. That is the one that is going to be more points efficient, but the SMS does show up a little bit lower down. So if you are interested in picking up a SMS for reasons, you certainly can do that, of course, but you are giving up a little bit of point efficiency for that. Looking at toughness 6 profiles, so we got the Broadside at T6, 2 up save, 8 wounds. The best choice against that, or at least the most point efficient choice, is going to be Crisis Suits with Commanders, Broadsides with the Heavy Rail Rifle. Again, Plasma Rifle is going to be more point efficient here. The Piranha with the Fusion Blaster, the Breachers, Riptides with Ion Accelerators, and Pathfinders with Rail round out the top 6. For the Star Weaver, which I'm pretty sure is the right model I have shown here, we have toughness 6, 4 up save, 6 wounds. So Breachers, again, showing up really strong here. Crisis Suits with Commanders, Broadsides and the Heavy Rail Rifle, Piranha with Fusion Blaster. The Skyray shows up for the first time. And again, it actually would be probably more efficient here because of the special rules the Skyray has and the fact that the Star Weaver is a flying unit. And then the Riptide with the Ion Accelerator shows up in last place. All right, looking at some bigger profiles here. So the Land Raider coming in at toughness 10, 2 up save, 16 wounds. We see the Storm Surge in first place here. It's the first time we've seen the Storm Surge. The Storm Surge generally performs very similarly across its loadout. So whether we're talking about the driver cannon or the blast cannon, both of those do comparably against several different targets. You'll see small variations in which one is going to be slightly better than the other, but for the most part they are comparable, and a lot of that has to do with just how much firepower they have from other sources as well. So the Storm Surge does perform very well here, and so whether you're picking the driver cannon, burst blast cannon, both of those are very strong choices. Broadsides with Heavy Rail Rifle, Crisis Suits, Commanders show up in third place. The Piranha with the Fusion Blaster, Breachers, and the Skyray all perform very well here. Against the Lehman Russ, so that has a profile now of toughness 11, 2 up save, 13 wounds. Storm Surge, Broadsides, Crisis, Piranha, Breachers, Skyray. Hey, look, it's the same thing. All right, so moving into things that have invulnerable saves, right? This complicates things a little bit because now we have the invuln save, and so AP doesn't matter as much. Mortal wound generation matters more. So yeah, you know how invulnerable save works. At these lower levels, a lot of the choices kind of tend to be the same. So we see Breachers, Strike Teams, Crisis Suits, Pathfinders of whatever sort you want, all rounding out the top 4 against Zangors. And then Stealth Teams show up here. This is the only time we really see Stealth Teams. And so it's kind of weird. But yeah, they show up here because, toughness 4 and basically no save. Stealth Suits actually deliver a fair punch apparently. And then Piranhas with the Burst Cannon show up here as well. We have against Terminators, which are toughness 5, 2 up save, 3 wounds with a 4 up invuln. Breachers, Vespid, Crisis Suits, Pathfinders with Rail, Broadsides with Rail, and Razor Sharks all show up here. And again, Razor Sharks show up really well against things that have invulnerable saves because the lack of AP doesn't matter as much, right? The fact that they only have -1, -2 if you overcharge AP doesn't affect the outcome very much, and so you're really looking at the strength damage and output, and so Razor Sharks can do that very well. And so they show up a lot more in these invuln save analyses than they do in the analyses that don't have invulnerable saves. Looking at some chonky boys with invuln saves. So if we're looking at like a Custodian at toughness 7, 2-up save with 4 wounds and a 4++. Crisis suits, crisis commanders do very well. Vespid, again, very well. Again, that's a product of the strength and damage of their weapon profile. Broadsides, heavy rail rifle, moral wound generation plays a part here. Breachers, Riptide with the Ion Accelerator, and Pathfinders with rail all perform well against Custodians. Hive Tyrants. So toughness 10, 2-up save, 10 wounds with a 4-up invuln. Breachers, broadsides. This generally the heavy rail rifle is the way to go here, but I think the high yield missile pod does show up in this ranking a little bit lower down. Sky Rays, Storm Surge, Razor Sharks, Pathfinders with rail, all again making a pretty consistent set of units against the Hive Tyrant. Moving on to some really big boys, we got Magnus the Red at toughness 11, 2-up save, 16 wounds with a 4-up invuln. Breachers do well here just because of volume of fire and point, like their volume of fire and points. Like they're cheap, you can get a lot out of them, especially with the Cadre Fireblade, right? That's a lot of volume of fire that can add up really quick. Broadsides with the heavy rail rifle, Storm Surge, Skyray, Razor Shark, Crisis Suits, Commanders, all of those round out the top 6 here. Very similar for the Wraith Knight. So Wraith Knight is the big bad of 10th edition so far, I think. Toughness 12, 2-up save, 18 wounds, 4-up invuln. Storm Surge doing a lot of work here. Broadsides with the heavy rail rifle, Crisis Suits, Commanders, Skyray, Razor Shark, Piranhas with Fusion Blasters. All of those can deliver quite the punch for what you pay for them against a Wraith Knight. And then our last profile we will look at is the Imperial Knight. Toughness 12, 3-up save, 22 wounds with a 5-up invuln. Storm Surge, Broadside with Rail Rifle, Piranha with Fusion Blaster, Skyray, Crisis Suits, Razor Shark. You're kind of getting the point now, aren't you? I think we're seeing a lot of these same units pop up time and time again, and the Imperial Knight is no different. So that is your top 6 units against Knights. Okay, so what does that all mean? Well, again, keep in mind this is new math. I had to re-rig all my spreadsheets and everything. So if something doesn't look right, take it with a grain of salt, I guess. Let me know in the comments. We can always reevaluate. But I think this is a pretty good first stab at point efficiency across the index. So if that is true, we see a lot of familiar friends being, relatively strong still, right? Breachers, Crisis Suits, Broadsides, all those things performed well in these calculations in 9th edition. They show up here too, and they can benefit from For the Greater Good, which is distinct from things like Vespid, which do show up again fairly consistently here, not as much as they did before, but because Vespid can't benefit from For the Greater Good, you have to think in a real context of their point efficiency is going to be reduced relative to these units that can benefit from For the Greater Good quite significantly. So even though they show up on the rankings here, they probably are still a utility pick based on their ability to hop down, perform actions, and then hop back up. You're not necessarily picking them to deliver a lot of damage for cheap. Their value is more in their gameplay than in their output necessarily. Pathfinders show up here too. In the past, they've shown up before, but it's been a little bit more context specific. Here, Pathfinders actually do a fair amount of damage because you don't have to pay a bunch of points for the rail rifle or the ion rifles, right? They're just included in the unit cost now. So you see Pathfinders being even more shooty than they were before. We also see some underutilized units from the past showing up more consistently. Like Skyrays showing up as being a consistently good pick is awesome, especially given the utility associated with Skyrays, right? They have those benefits for firing against certain targets. That's going to elevate their point efficiency against those. But also, they're just like a reliable observer unit, right? Like they are a vehicle, they're tougher, they're going to provide some good support in that way. And so Skyray showing up here is kind of a cherry on top for them. Storm Surges, like I said, they vary just a little bit based on their loadout. They're just kind of solid all around. But of course, they're a lot of points and, have their own drawbacks because of that. Piranhas in Melta range are very efficient. So generally when we're talking about the Fusion Blaster version, we're talking about them being in melta range. And that's because they have the speed and range on their weapon to actually achieve that, right? Like that's a reasonable thing to assume that they'll be able to get in melta range. Razor Sharks are flyers and have drawbacks because of that, but they can overcharge their quad ion turrets and deal a lot of damage and only suffer, one hazard test, right? So that's one of the best things I think about the Razor Shark is that it only requires one hazard test to overcharge. It's a vehicle. It can deal with the wounds. Like, it just seems like a really good trade-off. So Razor Shark showing up here isn't surprising given that they have a good number of shots and they can deliver quite a punch. And it's nice to see the Razor Shark actually getting some attention because it has been one of the most useless units in the Codex since it was released. So it's cool to see that. Again, let me know what you think in the comments below. Are there additional units you want me to look at, things that you think I need to reevaluate? Let's have a discussion about it. As always, thanks for watching, and of course, happy wargaming. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. If you want to pick up one of the Invasive Wargaming models before they become unavailable, head on over to the Invasive Wargaming Etsy store in the description below. Also, if you like this video, you should know that it is made possible by my kind sponsor, the Magnet Baron, as well as the excellent folks over on Patreon. If you want to support the channel, you can certainly hop on over there and join our community. Special thanks to Shifty, Durza, Everett Keller, Stephen Cowan, Jack Inacker, Jared Egler, and Scott Heater.